She was deployed. She fought. She survived. She kept every promise she made. Then she came home. Her husband of 4 years had remarried while she was still in the field. No call, no warning, nothing. She walked back through that gate with her bag on her shoulder and her whole life gone. That was how the night started. By the time it ended, her husband had lost everything he thought he had built, because the Korean Mafia boss heard and burned it all down. The night started with a soldier coming home. It did not end that way. So why? Why would a Korean Mafia boss interfere in the business of someone he barely knows? You'll know everything as the story begins. If this is your first time here, welcome to Afro-Korean Noir Stories. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story. We drop new stories every week, and trust me, you don't want to be the last one to know. Now, let's get into it. Diana Osei was 9 years old the morning her parents died for her. Not in a hospital, not from sickness. They died standing in the doorway of their own home with their arms out and their feet planted because 3 armed men had come through the front door. And the only thing standing between those men and their daughter was them. Her father was a school teacher. Her mother braided hair on weekends and sang in the kitchen while she cooked. Neither of them was supposed to die that way, but they did. And Diana ran. She ran through the bush behind their house in the dark, barefoot. The ground tore her feet open. She didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Behind her, shots cracked through the morning like something breaking that could never be put back together. She found a dry riverbed 3 fields away from home. She fell into it. She stayed there for 3 days. A neighbor found her on the 3rd morning, a woman who had survived her own hiding, who came to the riverbed because she had seen Emmanuel Osei's daughter run in this direction, and she had prayed the whole way there. Diana was alive, but the girl who had sat between her mother's knees the night before, with coconut oil in her hair and her father reading in the next room and not a single reason to be afraid that girl was gone. What came out of that riverbed made a decision. Not with words, not with a speech, just with the particular silence of a child who has lost everything and decided, right there in the cracked mud, what the rest of her life is going to be about. Not one more person, not while she was breathing. She was 9 years old. That decision would take her to the Navy. It would take her to war zones on 3 continents. It would take her to a valley where a stranger lay dying under a collapsed wall. A stranger who was not what he seemed, connected to a world she didn't know existed. But we're not there yet. First, she had to become the soldier the world would eventually need her to be. Diana grew up fast and quiet. She watched exits. She sat with her back to walls. She counted people in rooms without knowing she was doing it. Her aunt called her strange. Her teachers called her focused. The Navy recruitment officer who tested her at 17 underlined the word exceptional and fast-tracked her application. She signed the papers the same day they were put in front of her. Training was brutal. She didn't break. She didn't even bend. She moved through difficulty the way water moves through rock patient, relentless, finding every path and taking it. She rose fast. She earned commendations. She learned to read water, weather, weapons, and people. Especially people. Especially the ones who were lying, or afraid, or about to do something the room wasn't ready for. She was deployed for the first time at 20. She came back quieter but more certain. Like the promise she'd made in that riverbed was getting more real with every mission, not less. She was not trying to be a hero. She was just keeping her word. Then came the deployment that changed everything. She was 21. The briefing file described a coastal conflict zone in the kind of language intelligence reports use when they mean, we don't fully understand what is happening here, but won't say that. She was assigned to a ground unit, monitoring illegal weapon supply lines along the coast. Careful work, slow, surveillance, and pattern recognition. She was good at it. But on her 4th week, her unit intercepted a signal. A distress frequency coming from a valley 3 kilometers inland. Not their zone, not their assignment, but there was a human being attached to that signal. And Diana had a vow. She convinced her unit commander to go investigate. He agreed, reluctantly. What they found in that valley would change the direction of her entire life, though she wouldn't understand how until much later. The valley was quiet the way a place goes quiet after violence has passed through it. Dust, rock, a collapsed mud wall, half buried under its own debris. The kind of collapse that looks accidental until you get close and realize from the angle that something forced it. Diana reached the wall first. She pulled the first section of mud aside with her hands, cold, heavy, gritty against her palms. Underneath it, a man. He was Korean. She could tell immediately that he didn't belong here, not the way deployed soldiers don't belong, but deeper than that. His clothes, under the blood and the dust, were expensive. The watch on his wrist cost more than her last 2 years of service. No military ID, no documentation. What he had was a phone that didn't have a visible brand. A firearm her unit's weapons expert identified as not commercially available. And on his right hand, half covered by dried blood, a signet ring. The symbol on it meant nothing to her then. He had been shot twice, shoulder and side. He was losing blood fast. Her unit commander looked at him and made the calculation that field commanders are trained to make. Unidentified, non-combatant, unknown party, mission risk to extract. He said, "Leave him. Flag the location for medical follow-up." Diana said, "No." The commander looked at her. She said, "I'll carry him myself." And that is exactly what she did. 2 kilometers of rough terrain. Fire came in twice from a ridgeline, the second round bad enough that she dropped flat, covered his body with hers, and waited out the rounds before she could move again. Her shoulder took impact from a fall on loose rock. Her arms shook from the weight. She didn't stop. By the time they reached the extraction point, he was still breathing. 4 hours later, a field medic stabilized him. And when he finally opened his eyes, he looked at her. Not with fear, not with confusion, with something that looked, impossibly, like recognition. Like part of him had been expecting someone exactly like her. His name was Kang Seo-jin. She didn't know what that name meant yet. She was about to find out. They had 4 days together before the military's chain of command caught up with the situation and transferred him to a secure facility. Seo-jin was careful with what he said. Diana understood that immediately. He measured every sentence. He watched her the way she watched people filing, assessing, deciding. She didn't push him. She made sure he ate, made sure the bandages were clean, made sure the tent was quiet enough for him to sleep. On the second night, he asked her, "Why did you carry me?" She said, "Because you were alive, and I could." He shook his head. "That's not enough reason for what it cost you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about Kafara. About 9 years old. About the riverbed. She didn't dress it up. She told it plain and straight. This happened, then this, then this. Seo-jin listened without speaking until she was done. Then he said, "You don't owe the world that kind of pain." She looked at him. "I know. That's why I keep paying it. So someone else doesn't have to." Something moved in his face. Something controlled and internal, but real. She saw it. He didn't answer. But here is what he didn't tell her. He wasn't a journalist. He wasn't a civilian caught in the wrong place. Kang Seo-jin was the only son of Kang Dae-ho, a name Korean prosecutors had been building cases against for 11 years without ever getting close to filing charges. Dae-ho ran the most feared criminal network on the Korean peninsula. Weapons, contracts, silence. An empire built on the understanding that power, when properly organized, makes itself invisible. Dae-ho had sent his son to this region to confirm a weapons deal. A major shipment military grade, moving through the same coastal supply lines Diana's unit had been monitoring, was changing hands. Seo-jin was there to watch the transaction. But someone in Dae-ho's network had been working against him. An enemy with patience and information. They had known Seo-jin was coming. The ambush in the valley was a message. Your son is dead. Except he wasn't. Because a black naval soldier had refused to leave him under a wall. Here is what neither of them knew in that tent. The weapons moving through those coastal channels, the same supply lines Diana had been sent to monitor, were part of the same black market pipeline that had funded the men who came to Kafara. The men who killed her parents. Kang Dae-ho's operation was connected to that pipeline. 3 layers deep, buried behind shell companies and offshore accounts. Diana had saved the son of the man whose empire had helped create the morning that destroyed her childhood. Neither of them knew. Not yet. On the 4th day, Seo-jin's people came for him. A black, unmarked vehicle. Men in dark clothes who were not military. They spoke Korean and nothing else. Before he was moved, Seo-jin looked at Diana one last time. He said, "I won't forget this," she said. "Don't mention it." He almost smiled. Then he was gone. And Diana went back to her mission. Because soldiers don't stop. And her vow didn't take days off. 2 years later, she met John. She almost didn't go to the dinner party. She was tired that evening, the particular tired that doesn't come from not sleeping but from carrying something heavy for too long. But a colleague had insisted, and Diana had decided that saying yes to normal things was its own kind of discipline. John Adeyemi was standing by the window when she arrived. He didn't try to impress her. That was the first thing she noticed. Most men who met a decorated naval officer either tried too hard or backed away too fast. John just talked to her, like a person. Like she was someone worth talking to, rather than someone worth performing for. She liked that. They dated for 2 years. Comfortable dinners, easy silences, honest conversations where she told him real things, and he didn't flinch. He proposed on a Tuesday evening. No helicopter, no crowd. Just a ring in his jacket pocket, and a voice that was slightly unsteady when he asked. She said yes. They were married on a Saturday in March. The garden venue was Diana's choice. She wanted sky above her, air she could breathe, space that didn't feel closed in. John cried during the vows. She had never seen him cry before. She filed it away. This is a man who feels things. She thought she had chosen well. For 2 years, they built a life. Not perfect, Diana still woke at 3 in the morning sometimes, with the sound of that first shot from Kafara running behind her eyes. She still sat facing exits in restaurants. Still walked into rooms taking silent inventory. John knew. She had told him everything. He had said it didn't change anything. She believed him. Then the orders came. New deployment. Classified briefing. Her specific skill set was needed the combination of intelligence, work, and field capability that made her one of a small number of officers suited for this mission. Estimated timeline, 6 months. Possibly extending. She sat across from John at the same dinner table where he had proposed. She told him everything she could. The deployment, the timeline, the communication restrictions. His face did something she couldn't read. Half a second, then he composed himself. He said he understood. He said he supported her. He said he'd be there when she got back. She had no reason not to believe him. She left on a Thursday morning. John stood in the doorway as her car pulled away. She looked at him through the rear window. He raised his hand. She lifted 2 fingers off her knee. The house disappeared around the corner. She would not see it again for 2 years. 6 months became 8. The conflict expanded. Her unit was reassigned. Communication windows narrowed from hours to minutes. She wrote letters when she could. She made calls when the signal held. John wrote back in the first 6 months. Short letters, brief calls. She told herself this was normal. Distance does this to people. But by the 10th month, his letters had stopped talking about them. No mention of the future. No mention of plans. Just information. The car needed service. Work is busy. Short sentences with no warmth underneath. She told herself he was managing. By the 15th month, she called on his birthday. No answer. She called again the next day, and the day after. On the 4th attempt, the line connected. His voice was wrong, not tired, not distracted, but careful, chosen. The voice of someone building each sentence before he spoke it. He said he'd been busy. She asked how he was. Just fine, that's all. Fine. She waited for more. It didn't come. That was the last real conversation they had. After that, messages went unanswered. Texts came back in single words. And in the 17th month, the silence became total. She was in the middle of a war zone. She had wounded soldiers to get out. She had civilians to move. She had a promise she had made at 9 years old that did not pause for personal pain. So she carried it. She kept going. She pulled 3 wounded soldiers out of an ambush in the 16th month. She coordinated an evacuation that saved 47 civilians in the 18th. She pushed through the silence and the waiting and the longing with the same quiet discipline she had built in that dry riverbed. And in the 24th month, 2 years, almost to the day the conflict ended, Diana walked off the final transport with a body that remembered every one of those 24 months. The weight of it in her joints, the tension locked into her shoulders, the scar on her left forearm from the second round of fire in that valley all those years ago. But her heart was already running. She was going home. She didn't call ahead. Some instinct in her, the same instinct that had kept her alive through 2 years of conflict, said, "Let it be unscripted. Walk through the door. Smell the house. Be home for 5 minutes before anything else happens." She wanted to surprise John. The taxi took 40 minutes. She watched the city move past the window, familiar and strange at the same time. The way places look when the world has continued without you. New construction here. A shop changed there. The same crack in the road by the junction that no one had ever fixed. The house came into view. Same bougainvillea climbing the left wall, fuller now, higher. Same gate, same cracked step on the lower entrance that John had always said he'd fix. She paid the driver. She shouldered her bag. She walked to the door. She paused. And then, without logic, without reason, just because her body had spent 2 years reading situations before her mind could catch up, she knocked instead of walking in. She knocked on the door of her own house. Footsteps inside. The door opened. The woman standing there was not a total stranger. Diana had seen her before. Social events. A friend of John's circle. Quiet. Pleasant. A background person. Her name was Grace. She was wearing a house dress. And she was wearing it the way someone wears something they've worn in this house 100 times before. The silence between them was absolute. Diana looked at her. Grace looked at Diana. Recognition moved across both their faces at the same moment, but it arrived differently. On Diana's face, cold. On Grace's face, fear. Behind Grace, through the open doorway, Diana could see into the living room. Different curtains, different cushions. A framed photograph on the wall. She had never seen 2 people at what looked like a ceremony, dressed formally. She knew. She knew before a single word was spoken. Before John appeared behind Grace from the direction of the kitchen and saw her standing at his door. She watched his face, and in one terrible, permanent half-second the expression that crossed it was not joy. It was not guilt. It was not relief. It was calculation. The face of a man running options. Diana saw it. She saw it as clearly as she had ever seen anything in her life. John said her name. Then, "This isn't you need to let me explain." She looked at him. She looked at the curtains she hadn't chosen. The photograph she wasn't in. The woman, standing in her doorway. Then she turned around. She picked up her bag. She walked back to the gate. John called her name again, louder. Desperate. She didn't turn around. She didn't stop. She walked through the gate, and the moment it closed behind her, it felt permanent. Like something had just locked from the inside. The taxi driver was still parked 50 meters down the road, waiting on a call. She knocked on his window. She said, "I need a guest house." Her voice was completely steady. He started the engine immediately. "If you're still with me, drop a comment right now. What do you think the Korean Mafia boss is about to do when he finds out? I read every single comment. Let me know what you think. Now let's keep going." The room was small. 1 bed, 1 table. 1 window looking out onto a back wall. A light that buzzed faintly when she turned it on. The sheets were clean but thin, and the air smelled like concrete and something floral that wasn't quite working. Diana set her bag on the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her hands. She did not eat. She did not sleep. She simply sat. She thought about John's face. That half-second of calculation before the guilt arrived. She replayed it. Once, twice, 3 times. trying to figure out if she had ever seen it before and not known what she was looking at. Maybe she had. She sat with that. On the third night, she reached for her phone. She had exactly one person she trusted completely outside of her unit. Not family, not a fellow soldier. The Korean man from the valley. They had stayed in contact over the years, loosely, carefully, the way two people stay in contact when they are both carrying something they haven't named yet. Sometimes months would pass with nothing, but he always responded when she reached out. She typed 3 sentences. I came home. John remarried while I was deployed. I'm fine. She put the phone down. She didn't know what she was expecting. Maybe just acknowledgement. Just the knowledge that someone else knew. The phone rang 11 minutes later. What Kang Seo-jin had become in the years since Diana pulled him out of that valley, you need to understand this before you hear what happened next. He was not the same man. His father, Kang Dae-ho, had suffered a stroke 18 months ago. It left him functional but diminished. In the world Dae-ho had built, diminished was not a state you could stay in for long before the structure started to shift. Seo-jin hadn't resisted the succession. He hadn't campaigned for it either. He walked into the seat his bloodline had always prepared for him, and then he did something his father hadn't expected. He changed things. Not the empire's reach, not the power, but the specific operations, the supply chains, the kinds of work the Kang network touched. Seo-jin had reorganized all of it, quietly, over 18 months, in ways that even his father's most senior men hadn't fully mapped until it was done. He didn't make speeches. He didn't explain himself. He just made decisions. And in the world he operated in, a decision made with absolute certainty and followed through with absolute precision became its own kind of law. Here is what he also did in those 18 months. He shut down a weapons supply pipeline his father had run through West Africa. Profitable, established, running for 15 years without interruption. His lieutenants pushed back hard. He looked at them with those flat, assessing eyes. He said, "It's done." They asked why. He didn't answer. But you know why. Because in a field tent, a woman had told him about a dry riverbed, about 9 years old, about running barefoot through the dark. And every time Seo-jin had looked at the accounts from that pipeline, every time he had tried to run the numbers and make the profits outweigh the other thing, he had seen a girl running barefoot through the bush. He couldn't make the numbers win. So he shut it down. He had also, through channels he didn't explain to anyone, made sure Diana was quietly monitored during her deployment, not interfered with. Just watched over, from a distance, the way powerful people sometimes use that power to extend a protective cover over someone they won't admit they care about. He knew she was alive every month, even when she didn't message. And 3 months ago, a business contact had come to him with a deal involving a structural engineering firm in Diana's city. He had declined the meeting, but as standard procedure, he had run a background check on the contact. The file came back. Page 3, Professional Associates, John Adeyemi, Structural Engineer, Recent Marriage, Wife, Military Officer, Status, Deployed. Datus. Seo-jin had read that line 3 times. He hadn't acted on it. It wasn't his place. Diana hadn't told him, but he had kept the file. Now her message was on his phone. I came home. John remarried while I was deployed. I'm fine. He read it once. He read it again. Something very still and very cold settled behind his eyes. The particular stillness that people who knew Seo-jin had learned to recognize as the moment before something ended. He made 2 phone calls. Then he was on a plane. Diana was on her 3rd day in the guest house when the knock came. 3 precise knocks. Not urgent, certain. She crossed the bare floor and opened the door. Kang Seo-jin was standing in the narrow corridor. Dark overcoat, well cut. The kind of clothes that cost money in the way that doesn't announce itself. His face was exactly as she remembered, controlled, assessing. Those eyes always running a calculation slightly ahead of the visible world. He looked like he had been folded out of a different world entirely and placed in this corridor without apology. At the far end, 2 men stood with their hands loose at their sides. She clocked them immediately. Protection detail. Professional. She stared at him. He said, "You look like someone who hasn't slept in 3 days." She said, "You flew here." "Yes." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Then, because you carried me 2 kilometers under fire and never asked for anything back. The least I can do is show up." She looked at him for a long beat. Then she stepped back from the door. She let him in. He sat across from her at the small table. The window threw pale, late-afternoon light across the surface between them. He placed a folder on the table and left his hand on it for a moment before sliding it toward her. She looked at it. Then, she looked at him. "What is that?" "Everything," he said quietly. She opened it. What was inside had been assembled by Seojin's people in 72 hours, and it was devastating. John and Grace had not started their relationship after Diana deployed. They had been together for 14 months before she left. 14 months. While Diana was home, while she and John were sharing a house, a table, a bed. The dissolution of their marriage had not been grief. It had been a plan. John's lawyer had filed a missing spouse declaration using falsified documentation contact attempt records that had never happened, processed through channels with the help of a forged paper trail. John had not tried to reach Diana. He had waited out the timeline and let a fraudulent document do what he needed done. And the house. Their house, her house, built with years of military salary, had been refinanced in the 12th month of her deployment. The refinancing had been processed using a spousal consent form Diana had never signed. John had used the refinanced funds to stabilize a struggling business investment. He had used her house, her asset, to save his money. While she was in a war zone keeping her promises, Diana turned each page slowly. She read every document, every date, every forged signature, every line. Her face showed nothing. When she reached the last page, she closed the folder. She set her hands flat on the table. She breathed once. Steady. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" Not a cry for help. Not a request. A direct question to a direct man. Seojin looked at her. "Whatever you tell me to do, this is your call." She held his gaze. He could have moved already. He had the means and the information. He could have arrived, having already handled everything, and presented her with a done situation. But he hadn't. He had put the folder in front of her first. He was asking. She looked out the small window, the concrete wall, the last light of the afternoon. She thought about the riverbed, about the vow, about 24 months in a war zone with John's silence growing louder every week. She thought about the forged signature on a document filed while she was trying to keep people alive. She said, "He took the house, he took the assets, he took 4 years and buried them, and built something new on top of them while I was fighting." Seojin said nothing. She said, "I want him to feel every single thing he took from me." Silence. Then Seojin said, "All right." That was all. What followed did not happen loudly. That was the thing about Kang Seojin. He did not make announcements. He did not send warnings. He was the warning. The lawyer who had processed John's fraudulent documents woke up on a Monday morning to find every professional certification he held under review. 3 jurisdictions, 3 separate regulatory bodies, acting independently, on the same day. He hadn't been told. He hadn't been warned. He called John in a panic. Then he called his own lawyer. Within the week, his largest client, a government-adjacent infrastructure contract that covered 40% of his firm's revenue, received an anonymous package. The package contained documentation of irregularities in 3 of his previous cases. The client terminated the relationship by end of business Friday. The lawyer resigned from John's legal team on Thursday morning. John received the news by text. He stared at his phone for a long time. Then John's structural engineering firm received an audit notice, not broad, not general. Targeted focused on 3 specific projects John had personally signed off on, in which certain material certifications had been rushed through approval channels in ways that, under scrutiny, didn't hold up. Nothing criminal. But in the engineering world, an audit of this precision at this level leaves a mark on your name that never fully washes off. Clients paused. Contracts stopped progressing. His managing partner called him into a meeting. The conversation was not comfortable. Then the house collapsed. The refinancing John had arranged, the one built on Diana's forged signature, was flagged by a legal team representing Diana's interests. The team requested verification of the original spousal consent documentation. The financial institution suspended the account, pending review. The funds John had accessed were frozen. The house, which had been converted from an asset into a liability he could only carry with those funds, became a weight he couldn't manage overnight. Grace noticed. She had married John because he had represented stability, a solid man, a comfortable life, a house that felt like ground beneath her feet. The ground had disappeared. She packed quietly, over the course of a week. She called her sister. She left without drama. The house sat half-emptied and legally contested and completely silent. John called Diana 4 times. She did not answer. On the 4th call, he left a voicemail. He said he could explain. He said things had been complicated. He said it hadn't been easy being left behind, not knowing if she was coming back. He said that last part twice. Diana played the voicemail once. Then she deleted it. 3 weeks into the process, Sojin sat across from her again, same table, same small room, the light through the window going orange and slow, and told her something he had been deciding whether to say. He said, "While my people were building your file, they pulled threads on John's firm." She waited. He said, "What they found underneath, connected, through 3 shell companies and 2 offshore accounts, to an arms procurement network operating out of West Africa." The room went very still. She said, "What network?" "The same one," he said carefully. "The same class of weapons, the same supply chain, the same pipeline that ran through the coastal zone your unit was monitoring." She set down the glass in her hand. She said, "The pipeline connected to your father's operation?" "Yes." She looked at him. "And you?" "I shut it down. 18 months ago. First month after I took over. It was the first thing I closed." "Why?" He was quiet longer than usual. Then, "Because every time I looked at the accounts, I saw a girl running through the dark. I tried to make the numbers work. I couldn't." Diana looked at him for a long time. She said, "Your father's empire helped fund the men who came to Kafara." "Yes." She let that sit in the air between them. Then she said, "And you came here to close one of those deals. The day I found you in the valley." "Yes." She nodded once, slowly. "And I carried you out anyway." "Yes." She said, "I'd do it again." He looked at her. "Even knowing everything?" "Even knowing everything," she said. "That's what the vow is. It's not conditional." Something in Seojin's face broke open, just slightly, just for a second. Not performance, not calculation. "Something real." He said, "I know." They were outside on the small concrete area in front of the guest house. 2 chairs, a low table. The kind of evening that falls soft and orange over everything and makes the world look like it's being seen for the very first time. Diana said, "I went back to every war zone because I thought if I kept holding the line, kept going back, I could stop more people from feeling what I felt in that riverbed." Seojin waited. "And I come home," she said. "And the person I trusted most has been pulling the ground out from under me the whole time." She shook her head. "I kept the whole world safe," she said. "And I couldn't keep my own house." Seojin looked at her. "You kept me," he said. She looked at him. "You pulled me out when it could have cost you everything. Don't make that small." She was quiet. "The house will be returned," he said. "The assets, the legal process, is moving. Everything he took can be recovered." "I know," she said. "That's not the hard part." "What is?" She said, "The hard part is that I believed him. I looked at him and I thought he was safe." Seojin said, "You weren't wrong to believe him. I was wrong." "No. He made a choice to be the kind of man who would do this. That's his failure, not yours. Don't carry it." She looked at him the way she looked at things she was trying to understand all the way down. "You sound very certain," she said. "I am very certain." "Why?" He said, "Because I've done things I'm not proud of. I've made choices that cost other people. And the one thing I know The one thing I'm completely certain of is that the cost of those choices lives with me, not with the people I failed." He paused. "John made his choices. The cost is his. Don't take it." 3 weeks after she had stood at that gate and knocked on the door of her own house, Diana drove back to the street. She parked a block away and walked. Civilian clothes, no rank, no uniform, nothing official. Just a woman walking down a quiet street in the late afternoon, with her hands loose at her sides. The house came into view. Half emptied, you could feel it from outside, the particular vacancy that settles into a building when the life inside it has collapsed. The bougainvillea still grew up the left wall, fuller than before. The crack in the lower step was still there. She stood at the gate. She looked at the house for a long time. She thought about the girl in the riverbed, the vow. Everything that had grown out of that vow, the Navy, the deployments, Seo Jin in the valley, John across the dinner table, 24 months of war and silence and survival and kept promises. She thought about her mother's hands in her hair the night before everything ended. She thought about how she had rebuilt herself from that riverbed, piece by piece, with nothing but stubbornness and a promise. She could do it again. Not from nothing this time, from here. From this person she had become through all of it, every scar, every commendation, every mile walked, and every word kept. She took one long breath. She turned her back to the house. She walked toward the end of the street. At the far end, a black car sat at the curb. She had told Seojin she needed to do this part alone. He had nodded once the way he always did when she made a decision he respected, even if he might have made a different one. She walked toward the car. With every step she took away from that house, something changed in the quality of how she was moving. Not lighter. Diana Osei was not the kind of woman who became light, but forward. Completely, irreversibly, forward. She reached the car. The driver opened the rear door. She got in. Seojin was already inside. He looked at her when she settled into the seat. He didn't ask how it went. He didn't offer a word. He just looked at her, those careful eyes, that controlled face, and underneath both of them, something that had been alive since the moment she pulled him out of a valley with her bare hands and refused to walk away. She looked back at him. She said, "I'm ready." He nodded. The car pulled away from the curb. And Diana Osei, soldier, survivor, keeper of every promise she had ever made, left that street without looking back. Some things cannot be undone. That was exactly the point. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. We have more stories coming, and every single one of them hits this hard. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment got you the most? The door, the file, or the moment she turned her back on the house and walked away? I read everything. I'll see you in the next one.